Well, hey everybody, welcome to our weekly live stream and podcast here on the Illinoize.com. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. I write the daily, the Illinois newsletter, covering statewide politics and government and keeping an eye on the things that are happening around the state. And we are mercifully a little less than 2 weeks away from Election Day. And it's the Wild West out there, it seems. We've got candidates bickering and fighting and telling lies, and it's really it's been quite a quite an environment this year, maybe more than we've seen before, and maybe that just accounts to the sort of political environment that we're in right now. But it's disappointing to see, from the race for governor all the way down to local legislative races, just how bitter and how devoid from the truth many of these campaigns are, and that's Republicans and Democrats. I've talked about Mary Kay O'Brien's Supreme Court ad that seemingly made up Mike Burke's abortion position, or the hyperbole that's come out about the cash bail situation, which, while it needs to be clarified and needs to have fixes to specify, what a judge has the ability to do, calling it the end of the world is probably not accurate. So it's just one of those frustrating things that those of us who try to look at both sides with a little bit of fairness and a little bit of a skeptical eye say, hey, neither side has the corner on the truth. And that's one of the things that we keep trying to push out here, is that it's not necessarily a party that has good ideas or is telling the truth. It's candidates, it's situations, it's issues, and those are the things we need to focus on. So we're focusing today on Amendment 1, which is the Workers' Rights Amendment, as it's been dubbed by supporters, which is at the top of the ballot. It's the very first question you see. It's vaguely worded. If you aren't paying close attention to it, essentially supporters say it gives all employees the right to bargain in Illinois, but essentially those employees already have the right to bargain in Illinois, and those are all followed by federal statute. So I ask supporters why it needs to be done, and I ask opponents about their rhetoric that this will somehow raise property taxes. So we'll be joined by Mailee Smith from the Illinois Policy Institute, the conservative libertarian group that has an organized opposition to the amendment. And we begin with Tim Drea, who's the president of the AFL-CIO in Illinois. So we're talking about the Workers' Rights Amendment, Amendment 1, depending on who you ask and what you call it, the top of the ballot on November 8th or whenever you get your ballot. We are pleased to be welcomed by Tim Drea. He's the president of the Illinois AFL-CIO, which of course is in favor of the amendment. Tim, let me start here. What does this do? Because I don't think it's clear to a lot of people.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Patrick, and thanks for having me on. The Workers' Rights Amendment is very simple. It provides a fundamental right for every worker in the state to engage in collective bargaining. It gives every worker in the state a fundamental right to a safe workplace. It provides that we will not have any diminishment of the safety laws that's been enacted over the past 120 years in the state statute. And then finally, it provides for the protection to allow workers the freedom to collectively bargain in their workplace.
But they already have those rights, don't they, Tim?
Yes, we do have those rights. But what we're doing with this amendment is we're preserving those rights. So again, through the years, we've been very Illinois is a very good, strong, highly union culture state. And so all we're really doing is taking the rights that our fathers and our mothers and our grandmothers and grandfathers and their mothers and fathers have gained through the years and putting those rights in a lockbox that says they cannot be diminished, and stating in the state constitution that workers have where, you spend a large majority of your life of your adult life at work. And so we wanted to make sure that those rights are preserved in the workplace, the right to a work safe place. So, when you go to work in the morning, we want you to come home from work. We want you to come home from work, all in one piece and without workplace illnesses and injuries and things like that. So the right to a fundamental workplace is very, very important. And, with the economic security, that people can live strong middle-class lifestyles, all workers from domestic workers to PhDs. We want working families to succeed. And this amendment, we believe, protects them and helps them to succeed.
So here's one of the questions that I'm most unclear on, I think, because the way you all, the supporters, including the governor on down to the ads that you all are running, make this appear to be protecting the Amazon workers, the coal miners, up and down the list. But I went back and I pulled the transcript from last year when it was put on the ballot, and Ram Vilivalam, who's the senator that put the issue forward, said, and I'll just read it real quick. What he said: the amendment refers to employees and not workers or individuals. This was done with intention. As the members of this House should be aware, the National Labor Relations Act governs organizing and collective bargaining in the private sector, and as such preempts any direct state regulation of the subject. So he's even admitting, seemingly, that this would have absolutely no power, no proof, or no role, because the federal labor laws already superseded. Do you disagree with that?
Well, Senator Vilivalam is a very, very strong supporter of labor rights. And so I think what he was saying there is the fact that what really happens is that this amendment will give every worker in the state the right to collectively bargain. Once they have that right, they can come together in the workplace collectively.
But do they not have that now?
Yes, and then they can go through, but not a stated right. It's not stated in the Constitution that you do have that right. And once they petition that, yes, we want to have a union, then they would go through the National Labor Relations Act to certify the election. The NLRA is what governs the union elections. So you'd still be going through the federal process, but we would be providing a right in the state constitution in order to do that. Again, where you spend the majority of your adult life, you would have the right to have a very strong say on the job, a fundamental right to do so.
My guess is when I have our next guest on, who's from the Policy Institute, she's going to make the argument that this is kind of a power grab by public sector unions that are trying to lock themselves into a better negotiating stance, no matter who the governor is, no matter what the legislature looks like in the future. Obviously, there is a line in this state that's sort of been drawn on public versus private sector unions and who supports what and who doesn't. But in terms of the public sector union part of this, when we're not talking about coal miners or people who can, get run over by a dump truck, we're talking about people who are answering phones at a state office. Why do public sector unions need the same protections that you believe private sector union people do?
Well, it's very, in the pandemic, there were people showing up and going to work, to provide unemployment benefits to those people who were all of a sudden like overnight laid off. So there were people in public employment, certainly positions in public employment that work in mental health facilities and correctional facilities and places like that. The fundamental right to a safe workplace is very, very important to those people. And there's other areas of state employment that people really don't just, our people are park rangers in state parks and things like that. They're police officers. I mean, when you stop and think, there's a lot of people in the state of Illinois that work for the state of Illinois, work for the people of the state of Illinois, and they deserve a safe workplace as well. And I can't think of a better example than really brave men and women who are in law enforcement.
But they're already unionized. They're already protected.
Yes,
in terms of state police.
Well, I'm not going to say all public safety people are unionized. I'm sure there are a few out there that still haven't been. So but still, it guarantees them the right to a safe workplace. Even with or without a collective bargaining agreement, public safety people would have the right to a safe workplace.
Is this pushback from Bruce Rauner's right to work issue?
Well, certainly, Bruce Rauner was a wake-up call. Again, we had governors in the state of Illinois, Governor Edgar, certainly Governor Thompson. Those governors respected and sat down and listened to public employees, much like Governor Pritzker does. But Bruce Rauner came in with an agenda, and his agenda was to break unions. And so, we thought that it makes sense that we need a constitutional protection against people who come in and want to deny workers the right to a safe workplace or the right to middle class wages and things like that. So, yeah, Bruce Rauner was absolutely a wake up call to unions, and the next Bruce Rauner could be waiting in the wings.
Listen, everything's political, so I think this has got to be a part of it. That there's no secret out there that private or public sector unions tend to support Democrats. If you look at fundraising reports, Democrats are unions are a huge funder of Democratic candidates and their issues. Is this a situation in which Democrats and unions are in cahoots to help keep the gravy train rolling?
No, not at all. That's yes. I'll be the first to admit that the majority of our endorsements and funding go to Democrats. But then, when we look at voting records, we're very, very honest about this. We provide every 2 years, put together a voting record of the members of the General Assembly. If it's an open seat, we send out questionnaires to all the candidates, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, and we judge their responses and make our endorsements. So, we have a history of supporting Democrats because when we in the lawmaking process, they are usually, for the most part, more friendly to us. Now, that's not saying when this was put on the ballot, it received overwhelming support in the Senate. I think I got 51 or 52 votes in the Senate, and in the House we had 84. A very, very bipartisan vote to put this on the amendment. And then we've seen walk pieces that of Republican candidates endorsing the Workers' Rights Amendment. So it's worker safety and improving the lives of working families is not a partisan issue. It is absolutely bipartisan.
All right. So in the effectiveness of this, how it would actually work, let's use Amazon or Starbucks as an example, just because they're the ones in the news. When a Starbucks employee or an Amazon employee wants to organize a union, they immediately start following the national standard, the Federal Labor Relations Act, and all of those rules. So I come back to this, like when we're talking about Amazon, when we're talking about Starbucks, when we're talking about, again, a coal miner in Southern Illinois, how does this actually help them when everything that they do in the process of creating a union or being organized by a union falls under federal law?
Well, it would provide, again, the right. It gives people a right, we have many rights, voting rights and things like that. And it would give them the right to, under the Illinois Constitution, the law of the land, it would give them the right to engage in that collective bargaining process. It would be an enumerated right to engage in that process rather than, just, well, sure, you can do it. But we would recognize, the voters of Illinois would be recognizing the right for people to collectively engage in making improvements in the workplace.
Tim, before we let you go, maybe just a broader question about unions moving forward. You've seen the studies, I'm sure, and the reporting that 2016 and 2020, a lot of those blue collar union guys and gals, moved more toward Trump than they ever had a Republican presidential candidate before. And you're seeing, and polling shows this, results show this, that maybe some of those, specifically private sector, the blue collar kind of jobs are voting a little more Republican than they ever have before. Is the AFL-CIO specifically, but you can say unions in general, are you guys maybe staying farther left than your membership is moving?
No. I don't think so, Patrick. I mean, obviously, again, we judge candidates by what they do, legislators, candidates and legislators by what they do. So we send out a 55 questionnaire and to candidates. We look at every vote that's taken in the General Assembly, and we just yes or no. Did this person support us? Yes or no. And if they have, we tell our members that. Certainly when it comes to issues with executive offices, how do we judge those people, those candidates and office holders, incumbents? And it's the same thing. Are they good on prevailing project labor agreements? Do they support prevailing wage and things like that? So, the individual voters have different bells and whistles. We stay in our lane and look at the issues that affect working families.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because I was just going to reference the line from Darren Bailey at the first debate a couple of weeks ago, where he called on unions to stay in their lane. Did you take that as a warning shot?
No, not at all. I took it as, that's exactly what we're doing. We're staying in our lane, workplace safety, workplace, trying to improve workers' lives in the workplace. That's what we do. That's exactly what we do day in and day out. We from minimum wage to all issues that affect workers, that is our lane. And Patrick, we intend to stay there. And no matter who is a governor, no matter who is in charge of the legislature, no matter who is president, no matter what, we are going to stay in our lane and talk to, advocate for workers. That's our charge, and that's what we do.
Tim Drea, president of the Illinois AFL-CIO, in support of Amendment 1, the Workers' Rights Amendment. Tim, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Patrick, thank you.
Your side, we bring in Mailee Smith, who handles labor issues for the Illinois Policy Institute. The Policy Institute has put together one of the organized opposition campaigns to Amendment 1, the Workers' Rights Amendment. So, Mailee, let's start here. Tim Drea, who was just here, said this is a way to protect workers and help people come home safe at the end of the day. Why is this bad policy in your mind?
I think that if this was really about workers' protections, that's something that people could get behind. But that is not what Amendment 1 does. Amendment 1 is actually a first of its kind constitutional amendment that will drive up taxes and will cement Illinois' reputation as one of the worst places to do business. And the way it does that is that it grants a fundamental right to unionize to government unions. And then it expands bargaining for government unions beyond wages and benefits, those things that we typically think of being negotiated at the table. And instead includes broad new subjects that have never been tested anywhere else, like economic welfare. And then it prohibits lawmakers as the people's representatives from ever enacting reforms or fixes. So they could never say, they could discover, oh, wow, a few years from now, we didn't intend for this language to be so broad. They couldn't go back and enact legislation that restricts the subjects that government unions are demanding without running afoul of the Constitution. They also couldn't restrict strikes by government workers. So the way this all, plays together is that government union contracts, which already cost money, are going to cost even more money because of these expanded provisions that will be in the contracts. And that will be passed on to taxpayers. And that's really what's at stake with this here in November.
So I'll get to the public sector union part of this, but let's start with the private workers, because I think that's one of the main points of contention here. And I read the line from Ram Vilivalam in the debate last year where he said it doesn't apply to private sector workers, but that's the message that's being put forward, is that this is a way to protect your Amazon workers, your Starbucks workers, the people who are trying to unionize. I read that as these guys are already protected under federal law. So how do you see that?
So I think that this amendment was written very broadly to appeal to voters, to make them think that they're voting for something that this really isn't. The Supreme Court has been very clear, and they are that final authority on what law preempts or trumps other laws. And they have been explicit that states cannot regulate any activity that the National Labor Relations Act protects, prohibits, or arguably protects or prohibits. That's from a 1986 case, but that is the law of the land right now. States, if the federal government already occupies a space, the state can't come in and also try to regulate that space. And you're absolutely correct. The National Labor Relations Act already provides strong protections for workers in the private sector. And that, because that is there, this amendment cannot apply to the private sector. So you have the Supreme Court saying that very explicitly. And you're right. Senator Vilivalam during Senate debate also said that as federal law stands today, the amendment cannot apply to the private sector.
Devil's advocate, though, the legislature in Illinois essentially codified Roe in state law in the event that the courts overturned it, which they eventually did, or at least sent it back to the states. Is there an argument here that enshrining labor rights in the Illinois Constitution prevents any sort of questions if federal law were to change dramatically?
So the first thing to remember is that the National Labor Relations Act isn't going anywhere. It's been around for decades, well before Roe versus Wade, if we're making that like apples to oranges comparison. So it's been around for decades. And it isn't going away. If anything, government union or private sector unions have been strengthened through any amendments that have been made or things that the National Labor Relations Board has done. The second thing to remember is that if you're looking at the abortion issue, how is the federal government trying to kind of overcome what the court has done? It's by putting it into federal law. That is what we're hearing Democrats say that they want to do. So the fix there is to put it into federal law. So this isn't a case where, all of a sudden the Supreme Court is going to change things and the National Labor Relations Act isn't going to apply anymore. This is steady, set federal law that's not going anywhere.
And I think that is it's fair that it is apples to oranges because of court precedent and law, of course. But I do think it's at least their their opinion. So on the public sector union part, going back to the Billy Vollum comments, he said, we contend the status quo would be acceptable under the amendment for public sector unions. They're saying it wouldn't change. Why do you disagree with that?
Well, because of the way this is worded, if we were just going with the status quo, government unions in Illinois already have a right to unionize. They have a right to bargain. They have a right to bargain over wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. That language is in this amendment, but then it adds more language. Economic welfare and safety at work. Economic welfare is not defined in the amendment. It's not used in our state law. It's not used in other states or their constitutions. It's not used in the National Labor Relations Act. We have no way, it's completely untested. We have no way to know what that means. And I have heard proponents of the amendment admit in various media outlets, we just don't know what, you can't say it'll raise property taxes because we just don't know what will be in these contracts. That's the danger. Before this, we knew it would be wages, hours, or terms and conditions of employment.
And how do you make that connection? Sorry to interrupt you. How do you make that connection to property tax rates and this amendment? Because it looks like a bit of a stretch.
So government contracts already cost money. That is undeniable. So the current Chicago Teachers Union contract, it's a 5-year contract, is estimated to cost taxpayers $1.5 billion. CTU is a great example here of what could happen if this amendment passes. Something that CTU has tried to negotiate that they're really not able to negotiate right now are things like housing allowances. They have wanted the city to take a position on rent control, to advocate for certain things legislatively. Those are things that will drive up the cost of government. They're not currently in the already expensive contracts that cost money. But when you're adding more subjects into a contract, that is going to increase the cost of the contract. And you have to remember, too, that they will, under this amendment, have a permanent right to strike. That's unusual. Illinois is already an outlier in our region for allowing most or some or all government union workers to strike. None of our surrounding states allow that. So they have a right to demand a broad range of things, go on strike to get those demands met, shutting down government services. And the cost of those contracts has to come from somewhere, and it's going to be the taxpayers.
But they come from taxpayers anyway right now. And whether you're in, whether you're in a suburban school district, which has high property taxes and great schools, or you're in a rural school district that has high property taxes and not great schools, or the city of Chicago, which has both, if you want good teachers, if you want good employees, if you want, plenty of people who can fight fires and protect the streets, etc., these things are going to cost money anyway. So I guess don't you want these to cost a little bit of money?
Well, there's two things there. You're exactly correct. They already cost money, and they already have a right to bargain over wages and benefits. So those things that are directly funding or directly paying our government workers are already in those bargaining powers. What this amendment does is expand it to additional subjects that don't necessarily benefit the workers themselves. Chicago Teachers Union has demanded defunding of banks. Could be economic welfare. There are so many things that could be economic welfare that don't really help the government worker out, but helps the government union's agenda. And everyone is going to see the effect. Those workers themselves are also going to see the effect of these tax increases that come from the cost of these contracts. And you're right. Like, I think just to kind of break it down so it's a little bit easier, let's say on a very basic level, a contract right now has 5 provisions. And they can negotiate those 5 provisions, which they can negotiate much more than that. But let's say they can negotiate 5 provisions. Under the amendment, now they'll be able to negotiate 8 provisions, or they try to negotiate 8 provisions. Those additional provisions cost money. So while these contracts already cost money, they're going to cost more money, and that is what is going to drive up taxes.
Do you believe that private sector workers, Amazon and Starbucks are the ones that are in the news? Do you believe they have the right to organize and have the right to establish a union in their workplaces?
So we believe that people have the freedom of association. So that would include the freedom of creating their union. That in itself is a constitutional right. Where unions have crossed the line for years is that they're forcing people to be a part of their union, even if people don't want to be in that union. And so I think from a broader perspective, we should encourage people to make that decision for themselves. If they want to join a union, that's great. If they don't want to join a union, they should also have that right. And right now in the private sector in Illinois, they don't have that right.
So the left is going to look at your opposition to this and say these are the right-wing Rauner rights that hate unions and hate public sector employees and want to bankrupt their rights. So why should we look at what, again, I mean, in the same way, where are you coming from in here? Is this because it's good policy, or is this because it's bad politics for you?
This amendment is bad policy. It's going to drive up everyone's taxes, whether you are a union member or not. Like I said, they already have broad rights. And those rights won't go away if this amendment doesn't pass. So they already have broad rights to negotiate for wages and hours and terms and conditions of employment, those things that are traditionally negotiated. This goes above and beyond that. And this is something that no state has ever tried. Contrary to what proponents have said, there are 4 provisions. No state has any of these provisions, let alone all 4 of them. That includes Hawaii, which is commonly cited by proponents. Hawaii is really nothing like this, and in fact, gives deference to lawmakers in their constitution to make laws related to labor, as opposed to Amendment 1, which prohibits lawmakers from doing that.
Do you believe the advertising that's been out there and the governor's rhetoric as well has been very much in I believe people have the right to organize, have the right to unionize, that this impacts private business, that regular workers, Joe Blow out there. Do you believe that that's been disingenuous?
I do, because first of all, we have to remember that there are 4 provisions. The first 3 provisions that have to do with these rights that are fundamental, that are being created, only apply to the government sector because of the National Labor Relations Act. The 4th provision is a right to work ban. We aren't a right to work state as it is. That isn't on the table. Even though during the Rauner years, it was something that he supported, there was never even a bill that got to the hearing stage in our General Assembly. So right to work has never been on the horizon, is not on the horizon now. I think that workers are being scared into thinking that they have to have this or they will lose their jobs. And that is disingenuous. And what it really will do is make it harder for them to live here, because it will drive up their taxes. It will also make it harder to find jobs, because we already know that businesses are leaving Illinois, citing our poor business climate and our high taxes. And that jobs exodus is only going to get worse if this amendment passes.
Before we let you go, is there, I live in the suburbs, so I've seen more than a few yards that have Republican candidate signs and vote yes for this amendment in their yard. So it's not necessarily a partisan breakdown, but
right.
Do you see this as a way where you can look at this and say, I support unions, I support teachers unions, I support people having the right to organize, but still don't support this amendment?
Absolutely. And we have on our website, which is illinoispolicy.org, a section called Your Story. And we have already told the story of multiple union workers or former union members who have supported their unions in the past, but have said, no, this isn't about unions. This isn't about my rights as a worker. This is about union leadership and giving them broader power to get their agendas basically into law through their contracts rather than using the legislative process. So I absolutely believe that you can be supportive of your teachers, you can be supportive of your local government workers, and not support this amendment because it's going to raise everyone's taxes, including those workers and teachers and others.
Mailee Smith, staff attorney and director of labor policy for the Illinois Policy Institute. Mailee, thanks so much for the time and the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, so there's your conversation with Mailee Smith from the Illinois Policy Institute, as well as Tim Drea from the Illinois AFL-CIO, who joined us before that. I'm not here to tell you how to vote. That's not my job. That's not what I do. It's up to you. But we wanted to give you the ability to at least hear from both sides as you try to make a decision on this, especially because it's hard to find a lot of accurate information out there as people are headed to the polls and trying to figure out what they're going to do on the issue. And of course, many people have already voted. I'm one of them. Already sent my ballot in by mail. And it's I think important for people to know what's behind their vote, what's important to know as they get ready to send their ballot in or go vote on election day, especially when it comes to changing the state constitution. Before we let you go this afternoon, we had a story for subscribers this morning that there's some optimism for Republicans that it appears from what we're hearing that in polls, they are closing across the board in a Republican fashion in the final 2 weeks before Election Day. And while the general consensus is that things like the race for governor, the race for U.S. Senate, statewide races likely aren't in play, the closing in the gap could be a good thing for down ticket races, whether it's congressional races. You have 3 of them listed as toss-ups by Real Clear Politics, a couple less by Cook or 538. In the 13th, which is the Deering-Budzinski race, the 6th now the Pecaw-Caston race, and the 14th, which is the Greider-Underwood race. The 17th has already been one of those on the list that's leaning Republican, even though it's held by a Democrat right now. That's the Esther Joy King and Eric Sorensen race that's kind of got the Quad Cities and Peoria and Rockford too. It appears that as moderates are making up their minds, they're tending to break a little more Republican, and that at least by polling. And a couple of the pollsters that I talked to yesterday said that it's because abortion, while it's the maybe number one list if you ask everybody, that's because it's more Democrats than Republicans than independents as you look at the state as a whole. But if you look at the moderates and the undecideds, abortion's maybe 3rd or 4th on that list. So you're seeing the issue for moderates, for undecideds, being economic issues. And it's really interesting to me that if those are the ones that need to break, all Democrats have been talking about is abortion. It's been what they've put their entire campaigns into. It's all abortion all the time. All you have to do is turn on the TV, and that's what all of the Democratic candidates are airing their stuff on. So it's going to be really interesting over the final 2 weeks to see if Democrats shift their messaging a little bit, try and find a more economic line that they can come up with, or if they're just dancing with the girl that brung them. And it's going to be interesting to see, because it sounds like everything across the board is tightening, and it may not be the bloodbath that Republicans and Democrats alike expected it to be as little as 2 weeks ago. So we'll see how it plays out, obviously, over the next couple of weeks. But it sounds like the ground is kind of shifting underneath our feet a little bit as we're in the final 2 weeks here. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. So that's it for us today. Thanks so much for taking time to join us. If you're joining us on our live stream, thank you. We'll have it up on YouTube as well. And if you're listening on our podcast, thanks so much for taking the time to download as well. We really appreciate your support, your time. If you're not getting our daily newsletter, go to theillinoize.com and click subscribe up in the top right corner. You can get our free versions of newsletters and emails that come out 3 times a week. And then you can also become a paid subscriber that gets exclusive content every day from us. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Enjoy the Halloween weekend, and hopefully you get a few more little goblins and ghouls knocking on your doors than politicians. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.